In a world where safety is a luxury, there are places where danger lurks around every corner. Imagine lands where the very ground you walk on could be a battleground, where the shadows hold more than just darkness. These are not scenes from a thriller movie. They are real places where every day is a fight for survival. From the deserts of war-torn nations to the bustling streets of countries riddled with crime, the risk is palpable. Join me as we embark on a journey to uncover the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world for 2024. 10. Mali, located in West Africa, has faced significant challenges to stability in recent years. Ethnic tensions, particularly between the Tuareg separatists and the government, have fueled conflict. Additionally, the presence of jihadist groups, including Al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS, has further destabilized the country. The 2012 coup d'état and subsequent political turmoil have weakened governance and exacerbated security concerns. Human rights abuses, including targeted violence against civilians and widespread displacement, are prevalent. Despite international efforts to support peace and reconciliation, Mali continues to grapple with insecurity, hindering development and exacerbating humanitarian needs. 9. Central African Republic in Central Africa has experienced prolonged instability and violence. Ethnic and religious tensions, exacerbated by competition over resources and power, have fueled cycles of conflict. The country has been plagued by multiple armed groups engaging in widespread human rights abuses, including killings, sexual violence, and forced displacement. Weak governance and a lack of state authority have further compounded the challenges. The 2013 coup d'état and subsequent sectarian violence have left deep scars on the society. Despite international peacekeeping efforts, CAR remains highly volatile, with ongoing clashes and humanitarian crises affecting millions of people. 8. Democratic Republic of the Congo in Central Africa is rich in natural resources, but has been plagued by conflict and instability for decades. The country has experienced multiple civil wars, fueled by ethnic rivalries, political power struggles, and competition over resources. Armed groups, including rebel militias and foreign-backed insurgents, operate in various regions, perpetuating violence and insecurity. Human rights abuses, including massacres, sexual violence, and child recruitment, are widespread. Weak governance, corruption, and a lack of infrastructure exacerbate the challenges facing the DRC. Despite efforts to address the root causes of conflict and promote peace, the country continues to grapple with instability, hindering development and exacerbating humanitarian crises. 7. Libya in North Africa has been mired in conflict and political chaos since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The country has descended into a state of lawlessness, with multiple armed factions vying for power and control. The absence of a strong central authority has led to widespread violence, including clashes between rival militias, terrorist attacks, and human rights abuses. The proliferation of weapons and the presence of extremist groups, including ISIS, further exacerbate the security situation. Political fragmentation and the lack of a viable peace process have hindered efforts to resolve the conflict. The humanitarian situation in Libya is dire, with thousands of civilians displaced and in need of assistance. Despite international mediation efforts, Libya remains highly unstable, posing significant risks to residents and foreign nationals alike. 6. Somalia, located in the Horn of Africa, has been plagued by conflict, instability, and humanitarian crises for decades. The country has lacked effective central governance since the overthrow of Siad Barre in 1991, leading to protracted civil war and the emergence of various armed groups. Al-Shabaab, an Islamist militant group, continues to carry out attacks targeting government officials, security forces, and civilians. Piracy off the coast of Somalia further compounds the challenges facing the country. Humanitarian conditions are dire, with millions of people in need of assistance due to food insecurity, displacement, and lack of access to basic services. Despite efforts to rebuild state institutions and promote peace, Somalia remains highly volatile, with ongoing violence and political instability hampering progress. 5. South Sudan, the world's youngest country, gained independence in 2011, but has since been marred by conflict and instability. Ethnic tensions, exacerbated by competition over resources and political power, erupted into civil war in 2013. The conflict has resulted in widespread violence, including massacres, sexual violence, and displacement of millions of people. Both government forces and rebel groups have been accused of human rights abuses. The humanitarian situation is dire, with food insecurity and malnutrition reaching critical levels. Despite the signing of peace agreements and the formation of a unity government, sporadic fighting and intercommunal violence persist, hindering efforts to achieve lasting peace and stability. 4. Iraq in the Middle East has faced significant challenges to stability since the US-led invasion in 2003. Sectarian tensions between Sunni and Shia Muslims, exacerbated by political marginalization and competition for power, have fueled violence and conflict. The emergence of ISIS in 2014 further destabilized the country, leading to widespread atrocities, displacement, and destruction. Although Iraqi forces, supported by international coalitions, have succeeded in recapturing territory from ISIS, the group remains a threat through insurgent activities. Political instability, corruption, and weak governance continue to undermine efforts to rebuild the country and address the root causes of conflict. Iraq remains highly volatile, with ongoing violence, terrorist attacks, and humanitarian crises affecting millions of people. 3. Yemen, located on the Arabian Peninsula, is facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises due to ongoing conflict and political instability. The Yemeni civil war, which began in 2014, has escalated into a regional proxy war with multiple actors involved, including the Saudi-led coalition supporting the government and Houthi rebels backed by Iran. The conflict has resulted in widespread violence, civilian casualties, and destruction of infrastructure. Yemen is also grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis, with millions of people facing food insecurity, malnutrition, and lack of access to basic services. The blockade imposed by the Saudi-led coalition has exacerbated the situation, hindering the delivery of humanitarian aid. Despite international efforts to broker a ceasefire and peace negotiations, Yemen remains highly unstable, with no end in sight to the suffering of its people. 2. Afghanistan in Central Asia has been embroiled in conflict and instability for decades. The country has experienced multiple wars, invasions, and political upheavals, contributing to widespread violence and insecurity. The Taliban, an Islamist insurgent group, has waged a prolonged insurgency against the government and international forces since being ousted from power in 2001. Despite efforts to stabilize the country and promote democracy, Afghanistan continues to face significant challenges, including corruption, weak governance, and the illicit drug trade. The withdrawal of US and NATO forces has further complicated the security situation, leading to fears of a Taliban resurgence and potential civil war. Afghanistan remains highly unsafe, with ongoing violence, terrorist attacks, and humanitarian crises affecting millions of people. 1. Syria in the Middle East has been ravaged by a brutal civil war since 2011, resulting in one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 21st century. The conflict began as a pro-democracy uprising but quickly descended into a multi-sided war involving the government, rebel groups, jihadists, and international actors. The Syrian government, led by President Bashar al-Assad, has been accused of widespread human rights abuses, including the use of chemical weapons against civilians. ISIS also seized large swaths of territory, imposing its brutal rule on millions of people. The war has caused massive destruction, displacement, and loss of life, with millions of Syrians forced to flee their homes. Despite efforts to broker ceasefires and peace negotiations, the conflict remains unresolved, with violence and instability continuing to devastate the country. Syria is one of the most dangerous places on Earth, with no end in sight to the suffering of its people.